So I learned this from Vinod Khosla. A number of acquisitions that look strange, right? Character AI, Inception, Windsurf, Scale by Meta. And now that I've gone through an acquisition myself, I think I understand why big tech is acquiring companies that way. I think every engineer will be an AI engineer. Sam Altman said it's going to look like StarCraft, where you orchestrate an army of agents. There are two insights that I have. The first one is not discovered by us. It's discovered by our competitor, Supabase. And I'm going to give them credit here.
Welcome to another episode of AI Agent podcast, and we have a very special guest today with us, Nikita, founder of Neon. Thanks for taking the time off.
Excited to be here.
I'm really excited for our conversation. Yeah, to start with, would love to ask a very database geeky question. I have also been in databases for a big part of my life.
Yeah,
and
happy to answer. Yeah.
Yeah, and I saw the news of kind of Neon getting acquired to Databricks very recently, and I was like a bit kind of surprised because like Neon happens to be an OLTP database, while Databricks we all know is more of an OLAP warehouse. So kind of how does it make sense from a strategic point of view?
Well, think about complementary offerings. I think that's where it's coming from. At the end of the day, you're right. Analytical systems and operational systems, they kind of serve different class of users. If you are data systems like Databricks or Snowflake or ClickHouse or back in the day Teradata and whatnot, Redshift, BigQuery, you're serving a data engineer, data scientist, and a business analyst, especially, and then the ecosystem is like BI, dashboards, anyway, all this kind of analytical stuff. And then if you're building in operational systems like Neon, you serve any developer, because at the end of the day, databases are only useful if there's an application that is using that database. So from that standpoint, those are two different things. Now, the thing that unites them and creates more of a platform offering is the fact that both systems are data systems. And if you are a larger organization, then it makes a ton of sense to have those data systems to be together from the standpoint of security and governance to start with, and then from the standpoint of internal applications. So then it turns out that once you put data in one place, which the analytical data is already in Databricks, people want to build applications. And they want to build workflow apps. And think about things like, I don't know, expenses approvals, or ticketing systems, or onboarding apps. Like every modern company has a ton of those internal apps. And those apps need to have access to data. So the moment this happens, you realize that, oh, you can actually expand your platform. And starting from the system that accumulates all the data, now you need to go and allow people to build applications. So once you build applications, you need OLTP, and therefore it does make a ton of sense for Databricks to have an OLTP offering. And an application platform offering, which is already there, and it's one of the fastest growing kind of sub-products inside Databricks.
That's very cool. And I think, is there a AI strategic angle to it as well? Because I'm guessing like the internal apps are going to explode because of AI.
Well, AI is already there. There's a Genie product and then Agentbricks products inside Databricks. What I think you're referring to is code generation.
Yeah.
And I'm completely pilled on code generation, right? Because so many AI platforms use Neon underneath and pull through. So yes, you're absolutely right. I think when it comes down to apps that are built by Replit, Lovable, V0, I would call them, they start with CRUD apps, right? It's basically some simple workflow on top of a transactional database. When you think about apps that are internal apps running, that will be running and are running inside of the Databricks platform, those apps are more, they're subtly different from the bread and butter apps created by Replit. And what makes them different, they're data and catalog aware. Data in Databricks is governed by Unity Catalog. And if you're building internal apps, those entitlements and permissions are very, very important. So when you build, because like, large organization, who has access to what, audit logging, and there's a particular flavor to those apps. And that's why I think there is a big opportunity there for Databricks to invest in Cogent and also partner with those Cogent platforms such as Lovable, Replit, V0, Cognition Labs, Cursor, to build a particular flavor of apps in the enterprise.
Interesting. Any interesting partnership on the way that I?
There are Superblocks partnerships that was announced at Data and AI Summit, and there's a bunch of them in the works. But I'm not in a position to announce anything today.
For sure, yeah. I think generally like Neon acquisition, then there was a recent Windsurf acquisition. I think there have been a lot of M&As in kind of like the AI space. Any take on that? Like Windsurf acquisition obviously took a lot of flake around it. So what's your read on the situation generally?
So a number of acquisitions that look strange, right? Like Character AI, Inception, most recently Windsurf, and then earlier the acquisition of Scale by Meta. And now that I've gone through an acquisition myself, I think I understand why big tech is acquiring companies that way. Neon is more of a standard acquisition. Here's a company, here's a cap table, here's the founders, the technical team, and people are being paid out, and then incentives are put on top. Retention incentives are put on top of people, so we all have quote unquote golden handcuffs. Now, the one part of that acquisition is called what is called HSR filing. And what this means is you need to file with the federal government that, hey, and that's what the acquirer does. They file those HSR papers, or it's called HSR filing, which basically required for every acquisition north of $100 and some million to make sure that there isn't antitrust issues going on in this acquisition. Now, what then happens is you wait for 30 days, and if in 30 days the government does not, quote unquote, inquire, then you're good. The acquisition can go through. If the government does inquire, then you need to respond to the inquiry, and it pushes the acquisition date by at least another 30 days. In the AI space, where the competition is very, very intense, there's a lot of regulatory scrutiny for every acquisition. And therefore, HSR inquiry is almost guaranteed. And at the same time, it's an incredibly competitive space. So if you were a big tech and you decided to acquire something, you don't want to sit and wait for HSR to approve, for the government to approve this transaction. And these can drag for like a year. Now, a year is an eternity in a very, very fast-moving space. So I think that's why those things are happening now, where it's a way to kind of bypass that process that has proven to be dragging for high-profile AI acquisitions.
Interesting.
So hopefully there will be a fix on because I think the fact that those acquisitions are this weird is not a good look on the tech industry. So I hope those will disappear, but it needs to be fixed at the regulatory level. Either that needs to be closed and then treated as a loophole, like those kind of acquisitions should be banned, or the whole process of approving a transaction needs to be more transparent and understood. And then big tech will start doing those weird things.
Got it, got it. Yeah, and you mentioned like things are moving really, really fast, right? A lot of founders listen to this podcast. So I think as a founder, I have one kind of like, I think, question that comes to my mind at least a lot. So every other week, there is a new launch by the Big Four labs, etc. And like things change under the ground and kind of like new things launch, new capabilities come into the picture. Like how, like for example at Neon, you think about strategically like what's the next move, etc., given like the situation is so radical and things are changing so fast?
So I learned this from Vinod Khosla. He said, when you are in such situation, now you are either building that new technology, right? You're one of the AI labs, or an AI company that is building on top of these capabilities, or you're not.
Right.
So, but you are participating one way or another in this world, and the way Neon participates in this is through those AI codegen platforms and through integrations with AI tools, which we do via an MCP. So now if you're using Cursor, Windsurf, you can install your MCP server and like off you go. But at the same time, we are not an AI company. What I mean by that is our product is not an AI product. Our product is an infrastructure product and a developer platform. But then this world is expanding really, really rapidly. So how do you participate?
Yeah.
So what you want to do in a pattern like this is you cannot afford, as a startup, to not have an internal expertise in this new technology. And so you need to choose either a product or even you can start with a technology, with like a little lab with this Consource project that is experimenting and playing with this. And what it does, it builds out an internal capability and internal expertise towards that technology. What it is for us is obviously MCP, right? But that's too small. So if all we did was MCP, I don't think we are investing enough into the AI world. The second thing that you can do, kind of an obvious thing, is to put AI assistants everywhere through the product, right? We have a SQL editor, like there's an AI. Too simple. Like we do this,
Yeah.
but it's too simple. So what we did is we stood up a team to work on CodeGen, and we built an open source app generator that is similar in a way to Lovable and Replit, but it's not really designed to compete with them because we can't compete with them. First of all, we have our own mission of creating the best Postgres experience in the world, and we're busy doing that, right? And they're busy being the best vibe coding platform in the world. And kind of like as a company, we need to choose which one, right? And so certainly we are focused on building the best product, Postgres experience in the world. But having that side project and expertise allows us to understand those platforms very, very well and build out CodeGen expertise internally. So this product is called app.build. It's open source. We're not intending to make money on it, and it's kind of like a DevRel product for us.
Makes sense.
Right? So this is what you can do with Neon, and it becomes a blueprint for N+1 coding platform. Like maybe that platform decides to like go all in and compete with Lovable, Bolt, and Replit. If they were to learn how to use Neon and Neon's features, that a lot of them are built specifically for those CodeGen platforms, they can go and just kind of download the source code and plug that into their bigger platform. And we internally at Neon have organizational knowledge of how to build CodeGen. What is that agentic loop? What are code sandboxes? And that allows us to also understand what is our next product offering should be to enable those platforms, because kind of like I think every engineer will be an AI engineer, and coding will change from, I mean, we all know that, right? I'm not saying anything new now, but again, what Sam Altman said, it's going to look like StarCraft, where you orchestrate an army of agents and say, okay, do this task, do this tasks, and you're just kind of puppeteering this whole thing. So infrastructure will obviously change in this world, and at the minimum, we should support very rapid iteration loops, right? I need to do something. Oh, this something didn't work. Maybe I go back, and therefore anything stateful need to support to rewind the state. Kind of the same as Git allows you to rewind the state. That's one of the key capabilities of Neon, built specifically for such agentic environment. And how do we learn that? We learn that by working with Replit first and foremost, and we learn that by investing into our own little kind of skunkworks project that kind of highlights where the rough edges are, and that allows us to build a much better product.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very interesting insight. You should build your customer to learn from them, essentially.
Right. Yeah. So we built, we didn't build a full product of our customers, but we built a sketch of our customer's product, and that sketch kind of highlights how to use Neon end to end, and where we can build, the best experience. That I wouldn't call them agentic experience, because by themselves they're not agentic, but the end product experience are agentic. Yeah. And this is infrastructure that enables those agentic experience for our customers.
Yeah, I'm really curious, like what were some of the interesting, let's say, product changes that you would have to do to make that agentic experience or vibe coding experience really seamless? What are some of the tech changes you might have done to make that?
So here's one, there are two insights that I have. The first one is not discovered by us. It's discovered by our competitor Supabase, which is if you have, and I'm going to give them credit here, if you have something like that Supabase has, which is Supabase JS, which is a bundle, well-designed bundle that gives you all backend services in an easily to consume API. It's much easier to vibe code against that than against a number of piecemeal services. Each one has unique API. Right. And the reason to that is that when you might say, well, AI is smart, it can figure it out. Well, try to build an AI agent that uses a complex API such as AWS or something like this. Yeah. So it's going to be a nightmare. And the reason it's a nightmare because you as a creator of a vibe coding platform still need to test every single API call that your CodeGen platform is generating code against, and the surface area is large. And the more convoluted it is, the more mistakes your agents are going to be making, and you need to go and like fix them and fix your prompts. But if you have a clean API, and again, giving credit to Supabase, JS, and of course we, taking this as a inspiration and doing similar things, then it's much easier to code against. Our early version of that was we simplified the consumption of Postgres to the notion of database is just a URL. You don't need to think about sizing. You provision very, very quickly. So you go there, you click a button, here's a URL, and you will never need to do anything with it. Like there's no management API that you will have to do if you need to scale your app. So this auto scales and also scales to 0. So again, the first lesson is provide something that looks like Supabase JS. The second lesson is there's a cost equation to this in infrastructure. So serverless matters in this world. The velocity of app creation is very high. So we have, I think, like recent numbers, like 40,000 databases a day are spun up on Neon. A lot of them through those agentic platforms. Maybe half of this is Replit. And while the retention of Replit, the platform, is very high, like people get addicted to Replit, the retention of individual app is very low, right? because there's a lot of throwaway apps.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of apps that people are experimenting and trying and all that. So you have to have the cost equation right. And this Neon scaling to zero capabilities is what allows us to get the cost equation right. Because if you have millions of apps and you're paying, $1 a month, even $1 a month, but like typically a Postgres database is like $10 a month. Well, now you multiply a million by 10, and that's $10 million a month. But if you look at the CPU consumption on that fleet, it's going to be very low.
Yeah.
So you need to right-size that environment. Postgres does not scale to zero on itself. So that innovation of separation of storage compute and serverless enabled that. And we built it for human first, but then turned out super useful for agents. So then from there, the next learning is that environment iteration. So two scenarios here. The first one is, okay, I've built an app. Now I want to add a feature. I was like, hey, Replit or hey, Lovable, add me a feature. So it cogens another feature and modifies the state. At the minimum, modifies schema and maybe adds some data into the database. Then it's like, never mind, I want to go back. Well, there isn't, like, what do? Like backup and restore in classic Postgres? So Neon has the notion of snapshots, where you can say, okay, checkpoint here, do something. Oh, I changed my mind, go back to the checkpoint. And all of that is instant. So creating a checkpoint, well, we call it snapshots. Creating a snapshot is instant. Rolling back to the snapshot is instant. And the reason we can do that is because we control storage, right? So now it's kind of like a enterprise storage feature that people get in like SANs and stuff like that. But we built it from scratch. We built storage from scratch. And so we built those snapshots towards that experience where it's instant. And then now with like the rate at which snapshots are created is like unparalleled. Again, like there is a tremendous amount of snapshots being created every day. Finally, that same technology can also be used by supporting the following scenario. I'm going to build a new feature 10 times or however many times. And then I use a judge model to choose which one is best. So now I want to fork the state 10 times, do this thing in parallel, discard 9, potentially keep 1. And again, separation of storage and compute allows you to do that as well very, very efficiently, which otherwise you have to copy data and you have to like stand up Postgres instances. And so all of those things now come together where there's instant provisioning. This feature is called branching for us because you can create lots of branching, snapshots. So now we'll look at our user. And when we started, our user was a developer. Now we think of our user is an agent, an AI agent, or an AI developer. And like I said earlier, we believe that every developer will be an AI developer or go extinct. So now we need to build kind of for that future.
Makes complete sense. And what are some of the changes that you're kind of like thinking about coming from? Like, I think Neon is really known for its DX, developer experience, and now you're in some sense supporting agent experience or AI experience, right? AX. So what are some of the kind of interesting insights around like transitioning, I won't say, but like I think supporting both?
Well, they overlap a lot. They overlap a lot. I think it's a product management question. And in the product management world, the first question you need to ask yourself is who's the user? And once you say the user is an AI agent, then you just kind of like, you rename DX with AX, right? But it's, again, a lot of things are the same. But what you test against, either a human with cursor or an AI agentic platform. And the differences between AX and DX, I don't know. Right now, they are in MCP. right? I mean, humans don't care about MCPs, and agents do, and they are in those kind of like really high-scale forking and branching and snapshotting and rollbacking. Those are still useful for humans as well, but not as useful as they are for agents, because a human can afford to wait for a little bit when they create the backup.
Right.
But an agent expects this thing to be done quickly. I think over time, I don't know where it's going. Andy Grove, which is the CEO of Intel, once said that everything that could be done will be done. That can be done will be done. And so if there's enough pool, and I'm very excited to follow that pool of the market, because we can build crazy stuff, right? We're the cheapest database infrastructure for snapshotting and branching.
Right.
I can make it 10,000 cheaper from there and faster. By, for example, every time we do a branch, we spin up a I can make snapshots cheaper, but branches I can make cheaper because every branch creates a separate compute instance.
Right.
Like there's a separate VM running Postgres attached to the same storage. They're micro VMs, so they're very inexpensive. But I can reuse the VM. I can modify Postgres to support branches inside the Postgres engine. So maybe the future will be that. And the craziest idea that I heard is from a researcher. I think his name is Eugene Wu. He's in Columbia, who thinks that branching should be a part of an operating system. He thinks that the operating system itself, inside the OS,
Right.
should allow you to fork state, the operating system state, instantly, and kind of like support it's like a fork system call applied to the whole operating system, where I'm kind of thinking like you work on something like email, and you're like, I'm logged into all my browser tabs, but I want to delegate a task to an agent and continue working. And so just fork the whole operating system. Give that thing to an agent, and when the agent is done, kill that fork. So that would be an example of AX. And then, and again, like AX, DX, they overlap, but some things are more useful for agents than are for humans.
Makes complete sense. Yeah. I think we think about this question all day at Composer because we are kind of like developing for AX. We are building like tools for AI.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, when I hear those ideas from Eugene about an operating system, those things get me kind of excited in terms of company building and stuff, because they're hard to implement.
Right.
And I'm a system engineer, so I like to do hard things that then are very, very hard to copy. So if somebody wants to copy Neon or build Neon from scratch, well, they opt for a long journey, which has a lot of technical risk ahead of it. Again, everything that can be done will be done, and everything that was done before couldn't be copied. As a matter of fact, Neon kind of iterated on the Aurora architecture, which is proprietary and all that, but we were able to kind of build a next iteration of it over a few years. But anybody who wants to compete with Neon will have to also build that technology, and before building that technology, build a systems team, because you can only deliver on that technology if you have a kind of magnificent systems team, which may or may not be in that company DNA. So so I like to be in the position like this on the chessboard.
Makes complete sense. Yeah, I think coming to kind of like the Neon story, right? Like you mentioned, you had this idea about like kind of like open sourcing Aurora of sorts. What was the kind of like insight behind it? And like Aurora was there like very early on, right? Like in the
2014, I think Aurora launched. I remember early SingleStore. I was talking to my former mentor who was working on that Aurora project. He wouldn't tell me what he was working on, but then Aurora launched. His name is Alex Verbitsky. He's an amazing systems engineer. In the early years, I think he wrote a significant portion of the Aurora code base. I think Aurora is genius. I also think Aurora hasn't been checked. Checked meaning in the competitive, from the competitive dynamic standpoint. Redshift has very strong competition, which is Snowflake and Databricks, now ClickHouse. And Aurora just doesn't. Aurora's standing, I mean, now there's Alloy, which is a decent product on Google. Microsoft still doesn't have one. And I was looking at this and I was thinking about this idea for, I think, over 5 years before actually doing this. And arguably Neon's late. Like I should have done it sooner. They created an opening for Supabase. But at the same time, Supabase also showed us the value of DX. Supabase and Vercel. Those are the two companies. I think competition is good. And either somebody kind of takes the market, but more often than not, it's a kind of becoming a two-horse race. And then for a third horse, it's very tricky because the first two are basically taking the market and raising a lot of money, make it increasingly more expensive for the next entrant to go and compete with them. So back to the Neon story, the idea had worked for a very long time, and the idea was open source Aurora. Like the idea wasn't, bundling services. The idea wasn't about DX. The idea was really creating open source Aurora and going through enterprise. The stuff that I couldn't figure out was what class of apps would this new technology subsume, because database companies are built on changes in the app environment. MongoDB MySQL took advantage of the LAMP stack, the PHP MySQL, MongoDB of JSON and Node.js. So now you can have client and server speaking roughly the same language. So that's what Mongo was built on. What is this new thing here? Because database companies are built on new apps.
Right.
And well, turned out the revelation was that DX, if you invest in DX, there's this whole kind of developer segment of people creating new apps, and the number of apps exploded recently. And it started to explode. It was always kind of there. That was the success of Firebase as well, because they catered to that crowd. And that's the crowd that AWS ignores. Aurora is not built for that crowd. If it was, it would be positioning itself very differently. But the way Aurora positioned itself is like, we're better, more reliable, and faster. Postgres or MySQL.
Right.
And developers who start new, in small teams who start building new applications just don't care about that positioning. And the technology of Aurora is great, but the packaging for that segment of the market, which is basically DX, unboxing, pricing, free tier, doesn't exist. So that created an opening to have a narrow wedge into and allowed us to build Neon without a sales team. Now Neon grows on itself, double-digit % months and months since the launch, and that's an exciting place to be in because you mostly invest in your engineering team and how well you run the service. Demand comes to you. So the idea of building open source Aurora, I sat on this for a long time, but adding DX to this, where 1 + 1 = 10, that was kind of new, and we discovered this. And I give credits to our competition that showed us the way, and Guillermo and Vercel. He was an early agent, and he was chewing my ear in the early days of Neon a lot by, what's your integration with Next.js and how unboxing should be looking like, and giving us feedback on the early versions of the console, and certainly yelling at me for any hiccups in reliability. So I'm really, really grateful for Guillermo. He's been an incredible angel for us.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, by the way, he's an angel for us also. He's amazing.
Great.
Yeah. I think you have been through a bunch of crucible movements of sorts, right? Like I think, for example, in single store, it was like movement to cloud of sorts, and
Which
then
we
kind of,
missed.
yeah, yeah. I mean, but you kind of like I think
We
somewhat.
changed it. We changed it, and the single store is north of 100 million run rate business, very enterprise heavy, incredible technology, um, but the lesson there is that if you we focus too much on technology versus market, so we managed to build a system that supports OLTP and OLAP, and then create lots of learning to understand both systems. But the user is different. And so from the company building standpoint, having a narrow wedge into something and then expand works better than trying to do two things in one, and then you cater into two markets. So despite the fact that the end product might end up in the same place, it's better to wedge in something very, very narrow, like a blade of a very thin knife.
Makes sense. Yeah. And you mentioned, I think, like I've seen a stream of databases companies come in kind of like, I think in between, like kind of it's like a like wave of sorts. Like for example, I know like in between there was like a whole CockroachDB, Yugabyte, etc.
Yeah,
kind of in that wave. And now I think kind of you guys, Supabase.
Correct.
Like,
And I was looking at this because I also built, single store supports basically like has the technology that CockroachDB has, which
Right.
is a shared nothing system and a distributed query processor on top. They're more similar than different, to be honest, from that standpoint. And then single store can do analytics because it has column stores, and Cockroach, at least, well, I think I want to give credit to them. They chose the market. They said we're OLTP,
Right.
and single store, and it was my fault. Like we didn't choose the market. We said we want all data, as long as it's relational. And so, but once I understood it, it was it's like one of those things that you see and you cannot unsee. You're like, guys, you're doing it wrong. This is the way. And one piece of wisdom was given to me by Aaron Levy. I had a meeting with him. He was an angel at SingleStore, and he said, in the cloud, you got to design an offering that you can sell for $5 a month and $1 million a month.
Interesting.
And all these shared nothing systems, they miss the $5 a month piece
Right.
because they're naturally built for scale. So you start with a cluster, and like I'm running a 5-person team and building application from scratch. Don't give me that cognitive overload of trying to sell a cluster to me. I don't care.
Right,
I just
right.
want to get going. So that's where serverless is so useful. Is like, no, I'm going to reduce your cognitive overhead. First of all, I'm going to give you Postgres, and it's Postgres, right? It's not some other thing, so I don't
Right.
need to explain. So you already bought in on Postgres. I'm going to give you Postgres wholesale. Now, if I'm Cockroach or Yugabyte, I have a bunch of caveats to that statement. Yugabyte's closer to Postgres than Cockroach, but still they need to explain what's the difference, and they go into clusters, and it's like, oh my God, like it's too hard. And the other thing is when you miss the $5 a month piece,
Right.
somebody else takes it.
Yeah.
And once you are, once the customer got to a place where you are viable as an option, they already
Have
on their journey.
Yeah.
So now you're migrating. So you kind of chasing ambulances, right? So like you fail on scale, you fail, and here I am, right? You're now a lawyer that, like if you go outside of San Francisco, all those billboards with like lawyers is like, call me if you like injury lawyer or something like this. So you find yourself in that position, which is not a great place to be in.
Yeah.
Like that's annoying when you build a business. So when Aaron told me that, it hurt because it was Ryan Single Store. It was hurt. It's like he's obviously right, and you find yourself in that position. And when we designed Neon, it was very, very important to to build technology that people start on. And once you understand that kind of property of the string of database companies of that era, Cockroach, Yugabyte, and SingleStore, you can't unsee it. You're like, shit, like you got to do something different. And that's what, and I was surprised nobody built a competitor to Aurora. Because you roughly build the same amount of technology for a shared nothing system and a shared storage system like Neon. It's different technology, but system level engineering work.
Yeah.
So once you see that, you're like, oh. And then I tried to have Alex Verbitsky build it. I was like, Alex, we'll get you funding. You know how to build it. And I was like, no, I'm doing well at Amazon, like yada yada. And so eventually I had to build it myself.
Very interesting. And just curious on that front. And so for example, compared to the previous generation, you being serverless, being shared nothing, you have cold start problems, right? So is that a problem that comes a lot in general kind of developer discussion? How do you?
We're shared storage, we're not shared nothing. What do you mean by cold start? Oh, yeah, I see. So those things are, cold start is a cost optimization. There's the scalability of the system, and if you're willing to pay for a quarter CPU, you don't have a cold start problem.
Makes sense.
If you're so cheap that even the quarter CPU is too expensive, and Bio is really, really inexpensive to run the quarter CPU. I think even on the free tier, you can run the quarter CPU all the time. Now, on the free tier, we still we force scale to 0. So the cold start is only when you enable scale to 0.
Makes sense.
Now, it is important to us for the free tier to have scale to 0. Otherwise, our cost equation doesn't, with millions of databases under management, our cost equation doesn't work. And we were the fastest cold start for all this kind of, Aurora takes several minutes to, after they scale to 0. But still, it's if you enable scale to 0, now you're impacting people's DX. They stopped complaining once we made cold starts sub half a second.
Interesting.
So they are hovering between 200 and 400 milliseconds right now. We have lots of telemetry that we track those. The way it works is there is a warm pool of VMs that we quickly attach to storage. So when the cold start, there's a proxy listens to Postgres protocol, query comes in, oh, I don't have compute, then I'm going to go grab a VM from a pool running Camo and attach it to storage. So this whole process takes between 200 and 400 milliseconds. And it used to be longer. It used to be 5 seconds, then we made it 2 seconds, then we made it 1 second. And the amount of engineering, every time you half the cold start, the amount of engineering doubles for this to happen. So this, now if you want to go from 400 to 200, that's probably a lot more engineering to do. But we also listen to our customers and when they if they're complaining or not. So they stopped after we cleared half a second cold start.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think most of the queries, somewhat complex, would take around that time. So
it's not that. It's how fast is my app loading?
Right.
When I'm and you only experience cold starts when you're developing, right? Because when you put things into production, there's constant traffic to the app.
Right.
Or you go to the console and okay, I'm going to pay my $19 a month or something,
Right.
and then the system is up all the time. It can go from quarter CPU to 10 CPUs or something to save your money, but you're not going to have a cold start problem at all. But during development, it's annoying if things take 2 seconds because but once it's sub half a second, you don't have a cognitive overhead when you're developing software. So
makes sense. Yeah. Coming to AI, I think would love to understand what are some of the interesting use cases of Neon that you have seen that maybe took you also for surprise.
The biggest one was I mean, it's an AI question, but again, we're in the service of AI apps. In service of AI apps, the popularity of database per tenant surprised me. I did not think that so many apps would want to have a database per their user. And it ranges between, oh, I'm just going to quickly spin up a database for each project. Like I have a notion of a project. I don't know, like in legal, there's this thing, right? I have a bunch of legal documents in a folder. I want to grab them. I want to, create embeddings, and I want to put embeddings into a vector store. Which vector store? I just use Postgres. And so now on demand, I'm going to be lighting up an instance of an Neon instance on a per project basis. And there is a high velocity of those projects because, the user is a SaaS platform with, legal SaaS platform with lots and lots of projects coming and going. And another one is I have a SaaS service, and I'm willing to give each of my users a database. And
Interesting.
those things run at scale. So Atlassian is not our customer, but Atlassian chose to do that. I think they run millions of instances of Postgres. ServiceNow spends $100 million on hardware that runs Postgres internally. They run it on-prem. So even very large companies choose a database per tenant option,
Right.
and then tons and tons of small ones. So that turned out to be a very big use case. And of course, Neon has some advantages there because you can right-size each individual customer
Right.
without a scaling. So now, in a way, Replit is that, one database per app. So that database per tenant use case has lots of flavors, and it's more popular. I wouldn't have guessed when we started Neon. And some of that is driven by AI, and some of that is driven by the desire of
Security.
SaaS companies to isolate
Yeah.
each individual user into one database. It simplifies their development and increases security. What else surprised me? MCP surprised me, like everybody else. When Anthropic announced it in December, we quickly built it, and it didn't take off. But then, like in February or something, like it exploded. My whole Twitter was about MCP, and we're like, oh, we already have it. And then that became quite popular as well.
Right. What are some of the interesting use cases of people, for example, using Neon with MCP?
Just Cursor.
Got it. And like it's more around like checking out the schema. Like that's how like a lot of people use
Provisioning, query, schema evolution.
Makes complete sense. Interesting. And so like, and you mentioned like it's not just kind of like I think vibe coding softwares, right? Like agents are also
Yeah, that too, right? I'm vibe coding. You can vibe code in Replit, or then Neon will be pulled through, or you can install MCP and vibe code in Cursor, and then Neon will be pulled through as well.
Got it. Makes sense. But like my question is like people would be using like building agents also on top of Neon, right? Like vibe coding is one way, but like agentic execution, like or building agents on top of. So for example, we were just talking to the Clearly team. They use Neon.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
that's exciting.
Yeah, I think a lot of agentic companies would be using Neon. Is there any difference of sorts?
It's an interesting question. By the way, I'm excited Clearly is using it. It's an interesting question. A lot of that here is what's good for humans is good for agentic companies. I think AI agent companies is the flavor of companies of the day, right? If you go and look at YC, at like a prototypical YC company, it would be an AI agent company. So I think there's that bias there. I think people want to use modern tools, and new companies, they want to have an edge. So they want to use modern tools, like the easiest tool to use. So I think there's that bit going on. And also modern tools, I think I know the answer to this question. So when you build a new company, you try to to use a stack of technologies that allow you to move as fast as possible. And at every iteration, that stack is kind of slightly different, right? A long time ago, AWS showed up, and everybody started using AWS because you can build your startup faster on AWS than on-prem or something like this. So that the difference was very, very high.
Right.
I think we managed to be a part of the modern stack. So like, okay, well, payments, I use Stripe. And now for database, of course, I use Neon or Supabase for that matter. And so we managed to be in the suite of things that people perceive as modern, and we'll live this as well, right? And now all the tools that people are using, I think Cursor is probably like one of the is a lighthouse type product right now in the modern era. And then of course, Neon works very well with Cursor, unlike previous generation. And so we managed to integrate with all the modern tools that are tools du jour in developers building new apps, which is the right place to be in for a developer product. So I think that's why lots and lots of startups use this.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And like coming to a very kind of like interesting kind of thought experiment that I generally have, like in the future with AI, and like I think essentially, like, do you think there is an existence of like system of records? Because essentially you have so many new apps you can spawn like with vibe coding, and like you have DB like at the back end at Neon. So like, why do you need like a lot of these system of records SaaS apps? Like essentially you just need you can spawn up a new app and like the back end is just like a DB of sorts, right?
Yeah, so the largest enterprise companies are system of record for something. Salesforce, your customer data, SAP, business processes, it's an ERP system, Epic, healthcare system, Workday, HR system. So those are SaaS system of records. So if you become a system of record for an important part of the ServiceNow, IT ticketing data, if you become a system of record for something, it's a very lucrative place to be in. You can drive your market cap to the stratosphere. And we now, all of them are under attack right now because you can vibe code an app. And what I think we're going to see in the short term, they are all going to start locking down their data. We already see that, that Glean was barred from using Slack data. And so we see more of that because the system of records will try to protect that territory. I think the desire for people to vibe code an app against this data is very high. And then if you play the movie forward, people would want to have that data somewhere else. And the easier is to get this data somewhere else, the better. Now, as I'm talking to you, if we can create a network effect for that data at the data tier, I think that would be something just amazing. Because otherwise, so Neon separates storage and compute, but each database is still siloed from one another. If there was a network effect there somehow, which we may or may not figure out over time, then I think that becomes an enabling technology to like get rid of some of those things. Now they're very, very sticky. Like for example, like Databricks just announced big partnerships with SAP, and SAP is incredibly powerful. Like if SAP like turns off, the world stops. Like a bunch of like shipment and logistics, like a bunch of businesses will just like stop existing. So I like it's not going to happen overnight, but the desire to first consume that data in a app that you vibe code, and then the desire to potentially like not deal with that stuff at all, but like build your own internal IT stack through vibe coding also exists. Like I'm sure you use some sort of recruiting software, right? Greenhouse or something else, and you use some HR software. For like performance reviews, we use this software called HiBob. Is it great? It's cool, but we're paying something for it. But in the new world, for performance reviews, You just go to Replit and create one for yourself.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And the change probably will be faster because I think the whole kind of like UX is changing, like of sorts. Like people don't want to interact that much with the clunky apps. They would want to interact more with ChatGPTs of the world, where
Yeah. And then that's another change that is happening where I don't want to learn the next UI.
right,
Right? I'm going to, sorry, HiBob founders, I'm going to use you as an example. Performance review comes in, and I need to learn that UI one time. So twice a year, I'm going to HiBob to do performance reviews for my team.
right,
I mean, the guys have done a good job. It's a good product. But then I kind of want to like forget about it after the performance review cycle is done. So there is a barrier to entry to any new SaaS tool, regardless of how good of a job that is, and especially like and then some tools are so important then that Slack, right? Slack's very important.
Yeah.
So Slack's UX is it's really good. They can afford to do this. They can afford to have best designers, best best product people. They have a lot of information how to make it good. If you have something like a performance review tool, the bar for UX is lower. I'd rather consume this thing through ChatGPT, to be honest. And maybe this thing will like render me the minimum amount of UI right there and then. So yeah, I think a lot of those things will cease to exist.
makes sense. Yeah, I think one question around like I think you have mentioned a couple of like times that I at least heard like you have this quote of like build the future. So I think that means you need to predict the future to some extent, right?
Correct.
So what's like, for example, how are you seeing the future right now? How are you kind of like predicting the future? Let's say 1 year down the line, 5 years down the line. What do you think? And like for kind of founders listening to kind of like think about and start something.
Well, there's the big gorilla there is AGI, right? Because once which is arguably here, once we cross that, then a lot of things will change. So 5 years is really hard. So if you put AGI aside, so I think in the future we will temporarily have a lot more software.
Right.
Because the bar, it's like so much easier. So now a lot of apps that would have never existed now exist because it's much cheaper to create a new app. I think, so that's a good position for Neon, right? More software is better for Neon because apps need databases. I think then they might have maybe less software products because a lot of that will be pulled into those ChatGPT things,
right?
ChatGPT and Anthropic. So that's another thing that's going to happen, and I think we're going to have some weird professions come into play where, I'm a domain expert, so I'm just going to help to RL my AI how to do something because I have this proprietary knowledge and the AI doesn't because there wasn't enough in the training set. But there's expertise, so we're going to have those experts training AI for inside a particular domain, and domain could be very large, like legal, or domain could be like stealth bombers. Like I don't know how many people know how to make stealth bombers. Not many. I'm reading this book called Skunkworks about.
I think with Grok, many might.
Right. Exactly. So that's another thing that is probably going to happen. I think the system of record tools. So if we want to be able to build something that enables people to either extract data out of the system of records or create kind of a parallel universe where I can just vibe code my custom version of Salesforce. That's where I'm kind of excited about things, and I want to build a data platform that enables that. That kind of like allows you to disintermediate the data underneath those systems. And I think Postgres there is just the first step. Like, you need to kind of democratize that data and cross-share, right? Databases are still, too much of a black box, like to, even though the data is stored in the database, but it's not opened up to the rest of the world unless you go through that same database. So maybe we'll and since we separate storage and compute, I'm kind of thinking a lot about giving direct access to this data and having some sort of semantics on top of that. But yeah, we'll see how this is going to play out.
Yeah, no, I think makes sense. So I think we are almost at the end of it. I would love to do a quick rapid fire round.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's okay. So yeah, give like basically the boldest Postgres prediction that you have, and like over the next 5 years, like.
Ooh. I'll do two. Postgres will become multi-threaded. I hope. It's a bit of a relic that Postgres forks on every connection. But that's very niche. A bolder prediction is that we might see I think probability is like 20%, but we might see a different storage engine that is better than the Postgres storage engine in at least a couple of dimensions. It certainly not going to have vacuum. And that storage engine will allow direct access to the underlying data bypassing Postgres.
Your top 3 book recommendations.
I'm reading Skunkworks right now. I really like it. I'm kind of late to the game. Lots of people have read it. So I like Skunkworks. I like when the intensity at which people built this, during the heyday of the aviation industry, they were like going from propellers to jets to like stealth bombers to U-2 spy planes. They were doing insane things in the 60s. And that's just crazy to me. So I'm like very inspired by everything that was happening there, even though that's like soon to be 100 years ago.
Right.
So Skunkworks. I really like this book, The Splendid and the Vile, about Churchill and his Situation Room through World War II. That's another kind of like very far away, like, something that happened a long time ago, but he kind of ran his staff team. And the importance of aviation and industrialization, and I don't know, he hired the Elon Musk of that era to go and run his aviation department, and that's why they had rapid production of Spitfires. Like, yeah, there was a lot of interesting kind of parallels. So I really like this book, The Splendid and the Vile. And then David Deutsch's The Beginning of Infinity. That's probably my third recommendation.
Got it. Yeah. One other entrepreneur that you really admire.
There's so many, and we all know those names, right? I think the number one entrepreneur in the world is Elon. I think Zuck is insane how good he is. And prior to that, it's maybe Bill Gates. But there are many of them, and then again, we all know they're so high profile.
Makes sense. I think, what's your favorite food spot in and around SF?
Oof. I like coffee. So there's this coffee shop that makes competition espressos. Do you know what I'm talking about? Competition cappuccinos.
Not sure. Is it in SF or?
It is in SF, next to the Databricks office. Yeah.
Saint Frank?
Yes, that one.
Yeah, and that's a famous one in that area for sure.
Right. So let's just do that.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks for stopping by and
thanks for having
a great
me.
conversation. I think I really learned a lot from it. Hopefully, kind of some of our listeners also.
Of course, excited to be here.
Yeah, and all the best for kind of Neon Databricks.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, awesome.